The air hung heavy with the unmistakable scent of rain-soaked earth as Lily stepped into the dimly lit cabin. This wasn't part of her plan. The broken-down car, the relentless downpour, and the miles of desolate silence that enveloped them. Yet here they were, just her, Ethan, and the storm that seemed determined to close in around them. "It's not much," Ethan remarked, setting his bag down beside the fireplace. "But it's shelter." Lily nodded in agreement, though her mind was already churning with thoughts. As she surveyed the room, a sense of unease washed over her. The cabin had an unsettling quality that twisted her stomach and weighed down her legs. Perhaps it was the peeling wallpaper that hung in tattered strips, the eerie, oppressive stillness beyond the windows, or the old, creaking floorboards that seemed to echo the racing beat of her heart. Ethan busied himself trying to light a fire, his brow furrowed in concentration. Meanwhile, Lily traced her fingers along the windowsill, her nails scraping against the chipped wood as if to ground herself. She nodded absently, her mind racing with uncertainty. Something about the cabin felt wrong, profoundly wrong. It was the kind of wrong that gnawed at her gut, leaving her uneasy. The peeling wallpaper, the unsettling silence that loomed outside, the groaning floorboards, all of it combined to create a sense of foreboding that clung to her like a damp blanket. When Ethan finally managed to ignite the fire, its light flickered weakly, casting long shadows that danced across the walls. As the flames began to roar to life, she felt a chill creeping in, one that had little to do with the cool air swirling around them. Still focused on the stubborn logs, Ethan barely seemed to notice her fidgeting, which only heightened her anxiety. She caught a fleeting movement out of the corner of her eye, a shadow darting between the trees outside. "Did you see that?" she whispered, turning towards Ethan, her heart racing. "See what?" he asked, not lifting his gaze, completely absorbed in his task. "There's someone out there," she insisted, her voice barely above a whisper. Finally, Ethan looked up, his brows knitting together in concern. "It's pouring out there. No one would be out in this storm, Lily." His voice was steady, reassuring, yet her gut said otherwise. The shadow felt all too real, and her certainty that it was more than just exhaustion bore down on her like a weight. As time stretched on, the silence in the cabin grew palpable, thickening the air between them. Outside, the storm raged on, relentless and angry, while the warmth of the fire provided little comfort to Lily's fraying nerves. Noticing her distress, Ethan attempted to lighten the mood. "Quiet tonight," he said, brushing his hand against hers in a reassuring gesture. "I don't feel right," she admitted softly, vulnerability seeping into her words. "You're just tired. Let's get some rest," Ethan replied, moving closer, his fingers gently grazing her cheek, but it only provided minimal comfort. Eventually, they lay down on the makeshift bed Ethan had put together, but sleep eluded Lily. The tension from the shadow outside weighed heavily on her limbs, and Ethan's calm demeanor amplified her sense of isolation. Just as she began to slip into a restless slumber, vivid and dark dreams engulfed her. She felt a figure loom over her, its breath chilling against her face. Paralyzed by fear, she couldn't move or scream, the weight on her legs unbearable, as if bound by unseen hands. Suddenly, she jolted awake, gasping for breath. Ethan was gone. Panic surged through her as she realized the fire had turned to glowing embers, casting flickering shadows that danced eerily on the walls. "Ethan!" she called out, her voice trembling with fear. Silence answered her, echoing in the void where his presence should have been. Swinging her legs over the side of the bed, a jolt of pain shot through her like lightning. She collapsed, clutching her thighs, horrified to feel as if her own legs had betrayed her. Desperately, she crawled toward the door, calling for Ethan again, more urgently this time. Still, there was nothing but the haunting stillness that filled the space. Then, Lily froze as she heard footsteps, heavy, deliberate steps that most certainly did not belong to Ethan. The door creaked open, and a lump formed in her throat. A tall figure stood there, silhouetted against the dim light, his features obscured by the shadows. Gathering every ounce of courage, she demanded, "Where's Ethan?" Her voice trembled, a mix of fear and defiance. But the man remained silent, stepping closer, his boots leaving wet prints on the wooden floor, an unnerving contrast to the warmth she desperately craved. Lily scrambled backward, dragging her helpless legs behind her. "Stay away!" she screamed, her hands clawing desperately at the ground beneath her. The man halted just short of her, tilting his head as if he were studying her, assessing her every fear. Then he crouched down, his face inching into the dim light. It was Ethan, but his eyes were devoid of life, empty and hollow. "Ethan, what's going on?" she whispered, tears streaming down her cheeks, each drop heavy with dread. Once more, Lily pushed herself backward, her legs trailing across the wooden floor, her heart racing in her chest. "Stay away!" she cried out again, her hands scraping against the rough surface. He paused in front of her, tilting his head slightly as if trying to make sense of her terror. When he lowered himself closer, she could see him clearly. It was Ethan, but he was not the man she once knew. Hollow Ethan stared back at her. "You shouldn't have followed me," he said, his voice cold and unfamiliar, sending chills down her spine. "What are you talking about?" she urged, panic blaring in her mind. "This place, it takes something from you first, your legs, then your mind." "I tried to leave before it got you too," he replied, his gaze unfocused. Lily shook her head in disbelief, struggling to comprehend his words through the fog of fear. "We have to get out of here. We have to." Ethan offered her a cruel, distant smile, a mask of apathy etched across his face. "I already told you. I tried." Panic surged like a tidal wave, tightening her chest, making it hard to breathe. Gritting her teeth, she pushed herself backward, dragging her useless legs along the floor, every movement a battle against despair. She wanted to scream at him, imploring him to snap back to reality, but the words caught in her throat like lead. He stood there, motionless, his hollow eyes boring into her as though searching for something. For just a fleeting moment, it seemed that recognition sparked within him, a glimmer of the man she loved, but it flickered and vanished just as quickly, swallowed by the void. "I waited for you," he said, his voice flat and lifeless. "But now it's too late." "What do you mean, too late?" she cried, her voice tinged with desperation, each word trembling with emotion. "Ethan, we can leave together. We'll figure this out. Just help me." He didn't respond. Instead, he turned away from her and walked toward the window, his movements so slow and mechanical, as if unseen strings guided him onward, dragging him into the darkness. Lily's fingers clawed at the floorboards, urging herself to move toward him, but an invisible weight pressed down on her legs, making every inch feel like a mile. "Don't leave me!" she shouted, her voice breaking, raw with anguish. Ethan paused, his back still to her, a statue cast in despair. "It won't let me go, Lily. It won't let you go either, not now." "What?" Confusion enveloped her. "Is it what's causing this to us?" But he offered no reply. Instead, he pressed his palm against the glass, staring out into the suffocating darkness beyond. "You'll see," he whispered softly, almost like a prayer. The hours that followed became a terrible blur. The cabin felt alive, its walls groaning and shifting as the night stretched on. Shadows danced where no light reached, and whispers echoed through the stagnant air, chilling her to her very core. "Ethan? What's going on?" she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. But he didn't answer her. He remained transfixed at the window, lost within the abyss outside. "You'll see," he said again, an unsettling calm in his tone. As time slipped silently away, the cabin swelled with an oppressive presence, filling her with dread. Lily struggled desperately to find sleep, but every time she closed her eyes, a paralyzing sensation crept in, its breath tickling her neck, its icy fingers brushing against her skin, evoking terror with every whisper. When the pale, weak sun finally rose, bathing the room in its light, the nightmare seemed to ease, but Ethan was gone. The only trace of him remained in the dampness that lingered, a haunting reminder of what had been lost. 2 days later, rescuers found her, weak, delirious, and unable to articulate the horrors she had faced. "Where's Ethan?" they asked, their voices filled with urgency. Lily could only stare back at them, her voice barely above a whisper. "He tried to leave, but he couldn't." They told her she had been alone the entire time, but deep down she knew the truth. Her legs would never be the same again,